Welcome to Prescribing Prosperity with your hosts, John and Alex Soutsos from MedWealth Financial Services, operating through IPC Securities Corporation. In this podcast, we provide unique insights into wealth management, the psychology of financial decisions, and help listeners place the capital markets into perspective. Our aim is to help physicians, business owners, and other medical professionals to live their dream. Life is to live and enjoy, so we'll also cover health and lifestyle-related topics such as food, dining, travel, and unique experiences. Learn how global trends shape our investment strategy as we help you assemble your roadmap to prosperity.
Hello, and welcome to the Prescribing Prosperity podcast with your hosts, John and Alex Soutsos. Guys, good to see you again. I'm excited about the topic today because in this edition of your podcast, we are going to be talking about probably the single most important issue, whether it be corporately or culturally today, which is leadership. And to help guide that conversation and give us his insight and guidance is Gino Ferrin, owner and founder of Ferrin Leadership Development. Welcome, Gino. Good to see you, John and Alex.
Hi, Bill.
Hey.
How you doing, Bill?
Thank you, Bill. Nice to be with you.
It's nice to be with you as well. Alex, do you want to kick this conversation off? I could talk to Gino for about 30 minutes all by myself. So,
yeah. Well, I'll step in because Gino and I are personal friends, and perhaps Gino, you want to tell the story about how you and I met.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. John and I met through my lovely mother-in-law. How many people get to say that?
wow.
Yeah, not too many.
Not too many. I don't think so. 25 years ago now. And when my mother-in-law was given a contact in terms of investing some of her hard-earned and was put in touch with John, and isn't really a financial person. I'll say it that way. And so invited me to come along and say, Gino, can you help me out just making sure that I understand what's happening with my money and who John is and how he conducts himself. And so I did. And I could say a lot more, but suffice it to say, over and above John's expertise and professionalism, was a gentleman and someone who treated my mother-in-law, to my mind, exactly as he would treat his own mom. So that was the beginning. That was the catalyst of our relationship. And I think it's fair to say it's only broadened and strengthened over that time.
Thanks for that anecdote, Gino. And from my perspective, when I first met Gino, I was very impressed by his professional Sometimes you have family members come in to help parents out, and they are often confrontational for the sake of being confrontational without any particular reason. But Gino was very thoughtful and listened very intently, made notes, and then later would ask very poignant but thoughtful and relevant questions. So over the course of time, I garnered a great deal of respect for the way Gino behaved as a professional, as a person, and he very much impressed me. So we've developed a friendship beyond the business relationship. A disclaimer, Gino is also a client, or became a client long after his mother-in-law did. But we maintain a good friendship. But I'm really impressed with his knowledge on leadership. Especially, obviously, he runs a company based on leadership training. And we were very excited to be able to invite him to the podcast and pick his brain and learn more about leadership. On that subject matter, clearly leadership is something that happens in a variety of areas of life. You have leadership in families, you have leadership in business, leadership on sports teams, you have leadership in government, and other areas. And I can start off by saying there's a vacuum of leadership in political circles these days. So we're going to try and focus on areas that we have some control over and have some greater influence on. And that is those other three areas. And Gino, I like using quotes when I write my newsletters, and I like using quotes when starting off conversations at times. So what do you have a favorite quote about leadership?
Oh, I have so many, John, to be honest with you. Uh, and really they kind of all overlap. I think the best one for me is I'm almost amalgamating a few when I think of people like Ken Blanchard or Jack Welch, famous CEO of GE. That I think Jack was the one who said, to become a great leader, first you've got to focus on yourself and becoming the best that you can be. And then when you're a leader, your focus is on helping others become the best they can be. And I really like that one. I think that one's short and to the point and summarizes in large part what I do for a living. Yeah. And I know with our conversation today, others will come to my mind quite organically as we talk about specific subjects.
That is a great quote, and Jack Welch was certainly a great leader in his day. There have been in all walks of life many great leaders, and many of their famous quotes have been documented. One that stands out to me is from someone who's a lesser known, and the quote goes like this: "A man who wants to lead the orchestra must turn his back on the crowd." Max Lucado, and he's an orchestra conductor. But I thought that was a great quote to demonstrate the fact that you have to think a little bit differently in order to be a leader. And there are many other great quotes, of course, and we can't go through them all. But I think that's a good starting point for this. Gino, you've obviously, you and I are similar in age, so you've had a lot of experience in life. And perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you ended up in leadership and management development.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And that is a great quote. I happen to have heard that one and love that one myself. Yeah, it's listen, given that it's over 25 years ago, in fact, more than that, I'll be brief and simply share that, as a young man, I'll say haphazardly discerned early in my life as I was garnering an education that I thought I might like to teach in some form or another. And so, of course, in those days, I thought, well, I'll teach school, middle school or high school. I didn't really have the thought to teach elementary school, but that was, as I say, haphazardly, yeah, maybe I'll teach when you're 17, 18 years old. That's how the thoughts come out. And so that stayed with me. It was a bit of a seed. And over time, as I got to experience younger people, I myself being young, but doing a little bit of coaching as I played soccer, I thought the better of it and wondered if I had the patience to be a teacher, which is somewhat interesting because now I'm actually quite patient from most who have come to know me. But instead, I decided to go the business route. And again, not with any particular concrete goal in mind. Let me go into business. Let's learn about business and see where it may take me. And it was only after getting hired by Bell Canada in the early 90s, in fact, in their sales and service department, that I became aware of the formal Bell Training Center and how much they invested in developing their people, both technically and non-technically. And I gravitated towards that, and so started to formulate some goals, started to ask questions, had the distinct pleasure of having a couple of people that saw that in me as well, and we had some conversations. So there were questions like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And as opposed to letting go of that when I answered, well, I don't really know, they said, well, think about it, and let's talk about it again in 3 months. And so they kept the conversation alive. And so that blend enabled me to continue to delve into and ask the right questions and meet some people. And eventually it led to being hired within the Bell Training Department. And that's really where I cut my teeth and recognized in blending both my sporting background, which was an important part of my formation, and being in this company that truly valued and invested in developing people is where I came to foster my enthusiasm and I'll say my passion for wanting to lead others, wanting to enable the good and the development of others. That's what happened some 35 years ago. And from that, I stayed in their training department for some years, and then was looking to spread my wings, and was hired by a Canadian consulting firm that was a train the trainer firm based out of Ottawa. And that was excellent for my career trajectory as well, because it enabled me to travel all over Canada and the US. And so that's where I, unknowingly to myself at the time, began to build my network. So I was zigzagging North America in training trainers on how to train. And but I came to realize that as much as I love facilitating, that my true passion really was management and leadership. And so that's when I began to explore what's next in my career, and then worked for one other consulting firm based out of Ottawa, still traveling, but now focused on leadership development. And that led me to where I am today, some 22 years ago, where I started my own practice.
That's a great journey, and obviously you learned with every step in that journey. I was curious to know, how did your experience in athletics influence your mindset about leadership and approaching the objective of teaching leadership to others, or how did you learn from leaders you came across in your athletic endeavors?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. And I that question I answer regularly with my clients to this very day, because I think there's tremendous synergy that I've come to learn and experience over time. Part of that is organic. As a player on the field, I suspect somewhat from my parents and how I was raised, and somewhat just within my own organic passion for sport in general, in this case, soccer, which I played at the highest levels. I just came to be someone who took an interest not only in my own performance, but the performance of all those around me. And I know we'll get to this, but it just speaks to, if I'm part of something in which we all have a common goal, i.e., in this case, to win a championship, then everyone has to care, and everyone has to be invested not only in their own performance, but in the accountability of everyone else's performance.
That's interesting you should say that, Gino, because I remember watching a documentary with Mark Messier on the New York Rangers Stanley Cup victory, and about how while he was on the bench, he was talking to the other players, and he said, look, I'm only on the ice 1/3 of the time. 2/3 of the time, the rest of you guys are out there. So you guys got to go out there and you got to do your jobs and do it very well, because I can't do this by myself. And I think you echoed that very clearly in your response.
Yeah, and that's really fundamentally what sport did for me. As I say, part of it was organic, and it was a wonderful metaphor, really, for life, but certainly for leadership. And I began to recognize, sometimes the hard way, what those influencing practices needed to be, what worked and what didn't work. And these are experiences that I use to this very day. Thankfully, we've come a long way when it comes to leadership in terms of the research and the data we have behind us, because 25 years ago, there was far, far less credible data and research around this subject. Yeah, I think amongst other industries, but certainly the sporting industry lends itself, if one is so described, to as a preparation mode for influencing other people to greater performance, greater heights of performance.
That's great. That's that, having raised two sons and in competitive sports, I understand exactly what you mean, and you come across all types of personalities, and you learn from some. Perhaps it would be helpful to take a step back at this point before we get into your company and first define what leadership is. So, Gino, how do you classify leadership, and what are some of the key qualities of a good leader?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, John, because the truth is, as simplistic as that sounds, that has to be the starting point. And for anybody listening today, what's the definition of leadership? as I usually state, whether I'm in front of executives or middle managers, if you line up 100 executives from around North America and ask them to define leadership, you're going to get different answers.
Right.
And so it's really, really important to start with that foundation. And so although I have some latitude and flexibility, primarily as an organization, the way I define leadership is a person's abilities to successfully influence others by unleashing their potential and the organization's greater good. That's my definition of leadership.
Yeah, that's a great definition. And when I was looking up quotes on leadership, that theme was recurring. Many people kept defining leadership as bringing out the best in the people that they're leading, and eventually creating other leaders to take to help in the leadership of any organization. So, in your 25 years in business, what have you ascertained about the state of leadership today from your ongoing conversations with various business leaders across North America?
Yeah, it's, the good news about my industry, at least from a personal perspective, is that if anything, I'm more passionate about this field, I'll call it a field, versus a topic than I've been at any other time in my life, for the reasons that you noted earlier, John. I think our societies need it. They were beckoning leadership, and it's so with that definition, the qualities of a leader, obviously there's many, and when I say these, they may come across as cliche, but I think we need to start with qualities that actually have nothing to do with intellect. They're qualities such as character, humility, principles, and values. These are the fundamentals of the greatest leaders, as I've always intuitively believed and thought and even experienced, but I'm thankful that the data more or less validates this today when you look deeply into the research. Those are the real qualities. We of course, it would be silly, of course, not to note the fact that a leader needs to be intelligent and wise and have expertise in a particular field or functional area, of course. But the reality is, as you would all agree, all executives are smart. All executives have an intellect and an experience that lends themselves to the position. So what makes some really excel while others not so much?
That's great. Thank you for that, Gino. Those are excellent responses.
Absolutely. And Gino, now that we've established what leadership is, can you tell us a little bit about your company, including what your mandate is and what the vision is for both the company and your clients?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Alex. Absolutely a great question. And I hope and believe anyone listening will recognize that, in essence, in all that I've just shared, in reality describes my company's mandate and vision. But put simply, our vision is competently and ethically and passionately equip people leaders with foundational and ongoing knowledge, tools, and tactics that, when put into practice over time, result in polished skills and a healthy, positive culture that ultimately enables consistent high performance and therefore results. That's the vision of the company, and that's what we do through a variety of means and a variety of tools and even a variety of methods.
Mm-hmm. And now, before I wanted to ask you next to what kind of companies you work most often with, but before we get to that, it actually kind of jogged something in my mind when we were talking about sports, and you talked about giving people the tools in order to succeed, and we've seen it a lot in sports where you see different leadership styles that exist, and I'll get into that a little bit later on about different leadership styles. But when you have different types of leaders, when you're working with them and when your organization is working with them, does that differ, or does that alter your approach? Like, do you believe that there's one fundamental way that a leader should be operating, or do you work with the personality of the leader at the top of the organization and try to cater their practices and behaviors specific to their personality and the way they like to operate?
Yeah, what a great question, Alex. The question you've just asked is the heart of the matter. It's the heart of my industry. And let me start with the easy answer. Yeah, the leadership cannot, if you're seeking long-term success, be a cookie cutter solution. It's highly customized based on a variety of factors, many of which you've just noted. But it always starts with what I believe it always starts with, like in any family. What's your philosophy? What's your belief? What's your goal? And so even that definition that I shared with you, I typically get asked, and I will put that on the table, and then get feedback. And sometimes we need to modify the definition. And so it starts there. If we've got a really good aligned foundation in the philosophy of what this particular executive or executive team is seeking, what their goal is, then it typically flows much better. Then when we can get to, the how and the what, and the timing of what we're going to do. And there's a lot of complexity within that, because as you say, when you now start to impart knowledge and skills to leaders with the different personalities, with the different experiences, with the different backgrounds, whether it be educational or cultural or both, one size does not fit all. And that's the challenge of my industry. I half joke that the ultimate book I'm going to read as I get to the end of my career, and I'm not there yet, but to your question, Alex, the book's going to be called The Mortar in the Bricks.
Oh, wow.
And the reason it's going to be called The Mortar in the Bricks is because we all see the bricks. We all know the mandates of our businesses, whether we're in healthcare or manufacturing or IT, technology. We all know what we're in business to produce or what service we're providing. And of course, we focus on it. But the truth is, as it pertains to leadership, as it pertains to equipping people with what they require in order to be their best, to continue to grow and develop and perform, that's the mortar stuff. So I'm not, I somewhat at times unpopularly will state to an executive, the mortar, no one ever looks at a brick house and comments on the mortar. But if you don't have well mixed and well laid mortar, well, then those bricks are going to fall. And so that's really what my business is.
That's a phenomenal analogy or metaphor, Gino. That's very impressive. So yeah, good for you for coming up with that observation.
Yeah, I hope no one listening is going to steal my title now, but you know what? That's okay.
It's copyrighted. This whole thing is copyrighted.
This
Everything's
has been documented.
Yeah.
So I do genuinely want to come back to different leadership styles later on, but perhaps I'll park that for now, and we'll bring it up when we talk about inspirational leaders. So just we'll put a pin in that for now. But going back to just your company and your organization, what types of companies do you tend to work most often with? And do you find that you work a lot with organizations of a certain size or in a particular industry?
Yeah, and the short answer is to your last question, no. And I say that thankfully, Alex, because as we all no doubt recognize, people leadership applies to all industries. And so I've had the great pleasure of working with so many, as I've noted some of them: manufacturing, healthcare, technology, startups, and I love that about my industry. It's rightfully generic in that it's required and necessary regardless of what you're producing or selling or servicing. And so, yeah, that's lent itself to meeting extraordinary people along the way, including people that differ. I mean, as probably is true in all of our businesses, some of the richest conversations are off-record conversations. Right. Yes. When we're breaking bread together, or sharing a coffee or a drink together, and we really can get underneath on what do you really believe. So that's what it's afforded me. And so, yeah, industry wise, I continue to seek to expand our footprint, but yeah, not limited to any industries. Although I'll say that, the manufacturing industry and, food services industry, those are tough businesses because in essence, they're 24/7 businesses. So I have great appreciation for those businesses that are looking, especially manufacturing, keeping people safe, keeping people engaged, keeping people motivated, enabling their development and valuing them as people, while hitting your numbers and your results. That's lofty air.
Yeah.
Alex, if you don't mind, I'd like to interject here because Gino triggered a thought in me. I was reading a book, and I don't recall if it was on leadership or about something else, but in the book it talked about, and this is based on a true story, about a steel company in the United States that was having some difficulty, and they changed their leader. And the leader showed up at the press conference, and this is back in the I think 1980s. And Bill, if you listen to the story, you might know who I'm talking about. But he got up there and he said that when they asked him what's his number one objective, he said, "My number one objective is to have no accidents in the company in the next 12 months." And the reporters in the room ran to the telephone booths in the hallway and called their stockbrokers and said, "Sell my shares in this company. This guy's a nutcase." And as it turned out, his focus specifically on increasing the safety level of the practices in the business resulted in more buy-in from the employees and resulted in greater cooperation between management and employees, and eventually resulted in the company prospering to a much greater extent. And I don't remember the name of the company. It's an American steel company. Gino, do you know who I'm referring to? Or Bill, does that anecdote trigger any thoughts?
You know what? It's niggling on the edge of my brain, and it probably at some point during this podcast I'll shout the name out.
Yeah.
But yeah,
okay.
no, it's there, and I do remember the story you're talking about.
Yeah.
John, could it be Barry Waymiller, Bob Chapman?
It could very well be. I just simply don't remember, but I was wondering if you remember the name of the company that they were the head of. But I think that speaks to the process that you were describing in answering Alexander's question.
Yeah, absolutely. And if that is him, Bob has become somewhat of a celebrity leader, although he shuns the limelight because during the 08-09 financial crisis, and his company is $1 billion steel heavy machinery manufacturing company, Barry Waymiller. Great story. I think you could see this on YouTube if you Google Bob Chapman. But remarkable, and it shouldn't be remarkable. In my view, it should be the norm. But in essence, his executive team came to him and said, "Listen, Bob, we've lost 35% of our market share." And I'm paraphrasing here. I may be a percentage or two off. And so we've got to let people go. We've got to let people go. We have no choice. Of course, this was happening across the board during the financial crisis. And Bob refused. I won't give you the long form of the story if anyone's interested, but it's remarkable because Bob said, these are the same people that helped us have record profits for the last almost 10 years. And now we've got a crisis that is, of course, no fault of their own. And at first signs of trouble, we're going to let these very people go. We're not doing it. So we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how we're going to keep our people. And in essence, they created a furlough program. It was something to the effect where they mandated everyone in the organization to take 5 weeks of unpaid vacation so that everybody could keep their job and they could keep the costs in check.
Wow, that's very creative.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And listen to this, just to, Bob, a senior person now, still the head of the organization. Here's what happened because of the culture that he had built over time and just that act that he was doing countercultural. Here's what happened. Anybody in that organization who was, say, of a younger tenure, i.e. maybe newly married, maybe just bought a home or just had a child, what started to happen organically through no mandate of Bob or the executive team is these tenured people would approach the younger tenured people and say, listen, I know it's probably not easy for you. If you'd like, I'll take some of those unpaid vacation weeks and you take my weeks so you can get paid. And that's actually what happened. And I think they lost less than 0.5% of their employees during the financial crisis. So you talk about leadership, there it is.
Wow.
Absolutely.
That's what a great story.
That is a phenomenal story.
Yeah, Bill was kind enough to give us a quick message on that. So apparently it was Paul O'Neill from Alcoa Steel, but that's a phenomenal story as well, Gino. Just and it speaks really to what you were describing earlier, where the leadership having that ability to set an environment and a precedent that permeates through the organization, so that people on their own go out of their way to help one another and to make one another better and further the organization's well-being is truly remarkable and very challenging. And as you mentioned, the manufacturing industry and the food industry, it's becoming and it has become such a commoditized space. There's a lot of pressure to maintain and cut costs, and it would be very easy, as you would mention, to just go and say, hey guys, we got to lay off X%. But to find a creative solution like that is truly, truly remarkable. So with that, I'm going to flip it back over and into what we were discussing and just say, in your experience, Gino, what are some of the common mistakes or issues that you see at these organizations which impede the growth and development, both by the company and its employees?
Yeah, another great question, Alex, and an important one. Far too many organizations, in my view, lack the discipline. And that's a hard word. I'll look in my own mirror and often say, Gino, you need to have more discipline. It's a heavy word. We don't use it that often, or when we do use it, we use it lightheartedly. Of course, go ask any person who is at the top of their profession how important discipline is. And I think you'll quickly see just how pivotal and how much we should be exploring that. But organizations lack the discipline to follow through on what they instinctively know is important, which is continuously investing in your people. And it's counterintuitive that when there is a market downturn, that now layoffs are amongst the first things on the table on how we're going to hit our number. And off the record, my conversations with executives always lead to this. I would be happy to have a debate with any executive in the world as to the merit of leadership from a results perspective, from a cost, from a revenue, from a profit perspective. But I acknowledge they got me on one point. There's only one point where this comes somewhat tumbling down, meaning the investment in providing for your leaders ongoing. And that's short-term incentive. Mm-hmm. In other words, far too many executives off the record, thankfully not very many at all, if any of my clients, I'm very proud to say, but in my 25 years in this business, will say to me, Gino, I'm not paid to worry about what this company's health is in 5 years. I just got to get the number for the next 2 or 3 years, and then my turn will be gone and I'll go and someone else will worry about it later.
Right.
So think about the incentive from a decision-making perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I think there's, sorry, Dad, before you jump in, that reminds me a lot of sports. You see it a lot of times in professional sports, and I only bring it back to sports because it's something that a lot of people take pleasure in observing. But you see it in sports where people say, oh, they make a decision and they go out and they acquire a player or sign a free agent, and they say, well, that's fine. By the time this contract looks really bad, I'll be long gone. And that's such a poor mentality to maintain, especially, and not just especially, both for a business and a sport, because you are basically punting that problem to somebody else down the road, and you are throwing everybody else who's going to be part of the organization in the future under the bus. And it does not create a very conducive atmosphere or environment for people to build success for the long term and to achieve a greater deal of success. The way I think about it is in hockey, the Detroit Red Wings for a long time were a great organization, or they did a great job of building and maintaining a great team while also adding to their pipeline of prospects and developing it, and then eventually bringing those players up to the NHL level. And they had a continuous run of about 25 years of success. And actually, before we got on the on our call here, we're talking about soccer. Manchester United was another organization like that for many years. And it's the same thing in business. You don't want to just have a myopic short-term perspective. You need to be thinking in multiple stages. You need to be thinking in the short term, the 1 to 3 year, the 3 to 5 year, and then the 5 to 10 and longer window as well, whenever you're operating. So I think that's a great observation, Gino.
The key word in sorry, I thought you were done. The key word in this exchange was incentives and incentivization. And you see it in all walks of life, especially in politics. Politicians are incentivized for short-term gain and don't pay attention to the long term. So incentives play a big role. And how do you approach the subject of incentivization, Gino? Do you come to leaders and say, I think your incentivization in your organization is not right, and you should consider this or that? Or
Well, it certainly comes up, John, and it comes up, obviously, listen, fundamental to my industry is a word we haven't used yet, and the word is trust. Over and above what we may know about, our business relationships and business development. I should preface this all by saying, I think I said this in my opening. I share this with all my clients. I tell them all, I am not politically correct. But I define that. I define that as meaning I tell the truth as I see it, fully aware that at times I may be wrong or we may not agree, and that's okay. But I'm not going to say something for appeasement's sake, because when I engage with a client, I want good for them. So we need to discuss what good is, and at times, if that good doesn't align with what my good is, i.e., values or ethics or principles, then I'm comfortable to walk away and not walk away with any anger. I'm friends with some of these people. But again, if you're not philosophically aligned, it's like saying you want to go somewhere, you want to go skiing and I want to go to the beach. There's really no in between there. So we either have to discuss which one we're going to go and maybe the other one next time. But, we have to be honest. So
hold on, hot tub on a mountain. There's a
hybrid. Yeah. But so trust is a big word. We have to get where you noted, Alex. We've got to get to the conversations of what are your goals? Are they short term and long term? And the battle of short term and long term, in my view, is that how can any person, let alone an executive, in truth state on the record, I'm not worried about the health of the organization when I depart. Because then it becomes a much more complicated discussion, right? Yeah. And so we have to go there sometimes, and at times that's the end of that is I'm probably not the right partner, and that's okay, and we move forward. So I'll get in there. 15 years ago, I was afraid to have those conversations. I'll share, but now I'm much more comfortable and vulnerable to just say the truth. And if we're going to have a relationship, let's make sure that it's mutually beneficial, and let's have that right conversation. But that entails trust. And again, trust is one of those qualities that very few people invest in. And it's like money. If you don't invest it wisely with a long-term thought, then it's fleeting and it comes and goes, and there is a cost to it, even if we don't measure it.
It's interesting you bring up the subject of investing in money, because while you were answering the question, that's exactly what I was thinking of, is the incentivization for someone in my capacity as a portfolio manager is to produce good short-term numbers so we can keep people invested on a quarterly basis. But the truth is, you can't control the short term. Your target at all times has to be the horizon. And so as a portfolio manager and leading my clients' wealth into the future, I'm focused on that horizon, and I'm doing what I think is going to help them achieve that objective over time. And sometimes you have to sacrifice short-term goal attainment in exchange for the longer-term goal attainment, which is always the more important of the two. But people get distracted by other things, especially in the media, and it undermines their investment process. So anyway, back to you, Alex.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy to draw, because a lot of people tend to be I think about it in terms of like being a subway driver versus a, an airline pilot. As the portfolio manager, you need to be like the airline pilot, where you're focused on the long-term horizon and destination. And a lot of people tend to actually operate more like the subway operator, who's going from stop to stop to stop. And I think that's true of the leadership business as well, where a lot of people are like that. And I think it's unfortunate because, going back to Gino's metaphor of the bricks and mortar, you need to have a good foundation. The fundamental of any business is that it has to be a going concern, which means that you expect the business to continue into the future. And if your only focus is on the short term, your ability to maintain that going concern is called into question, and potentially puts the organization in jeopardy, because of the fact that you're only making decisions that are going to be beneficial in the interim, and trying to meet your short-term objectives. And going back to the foundation, you want it to be a solid enough foundation that the company continues, and it is stable enough to continue to survive in perpetuity. But going back to your company and your mandate, the last question I'll ask you before we switch topics is, what kinds of tools do you and your team have to help deliver this mandate, and to help achieve the vision that you've outlined for both you and for your clients?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Alex, and it's an important one. And again, a word that always jumps out at me, and when people ask me to describe, what is it the organization can provide? Agility. Agility is fundamental, and within that agility, meaning obviously to be flexible. And if I'm meeting any potential client partner for the first time, it's really about asking good questions and listening. Mm-hmm. That's that, and getting to know each other, which, to your point, by the way, we might as well, as I speak about my organization, building trust is like the foundation, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And similar to the mortar and the bricks, when someone sees a beautiful home, how often do you hear them comment on the foundation?
Never.
Now ask any homeowner if they care about how well built the foundation was, and you get your answer. And it astonishes me to some degree. To some degree, I think it's explainable by the pace of life and what technology has done to our lives, where we think we can build trust with 1 5-minute coffee with somebody, or a quick conversation in your office. And it's just not true. It's just not possible. We're just lying to ourselves. And yet I have never heard an executive, well, I've heard one in my career, so let's say none, say to me, I usually give them a choice. How important is trust to the overall health and success of your business? And I give them 3 buckets: not very important at all, somewhat important, or critically important. And as you can imagine, 99.9% of business leaders, executives say, Gino, critical. Trust is critical. But then when you follow it up with, so what's your trust strategy? What are the tactics that you employ to build genuine, healthy trust? Mm-hmm. And there's no strategy. There's just no strategy. Yeah. So again, it's like money. I would equate it to basically having money and you put it under your mattress because you're afraid to lose it. And when you wake up 15, 20 years later and you go to use it, well, its purchasing power has gone down tremendously. So you lost money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about before about the whole notion that it's the off the record conversations are the ones where you really build that trust. And I think it's something that we've lost to a certain extent in the last few years as a result of the pandemic. The virtual work environment, people, it takes a lot of time to build those relationships, to build that trust, and to have those conversations off the record. I remember it at my first job, just how much I enjoyed the peripheral aspects of the job. I just love socializing with the people that I worked with. I worked with a lot of great people. I was very fortunate. And, the jobs that I've had since then, during the pandemic, in particular, it was definitely more challenging. And you can certainly appreciate why a lot of organizations are trying to get back to an in-person model, not because they're trying to justify the physical investments they've made in infrastructure, which I'm sure they are to a certain extent, but more importantly, the value that's created from those in-person interactions is immeasurable, and it's difficult to quantify. And I think that's why a lot of people think that we can do without it, but it's so important and it's so crucial. Anyway, Dad, I'll flip it back over to you so we can move on to the next topic of inspirational leaders.
In the end, when it's over, all that matters is what you've done. Alexander the Great. Gino, who are some of the leaders that have inspired you over the years?
So many, John, and I'm happy to say that. Some that stand out to me, both from the past and to today. Mother Teresa is an exceptional leader. If you study her life and what she accomplished and how she influenced people to a cause for greater good. Winston Churchill, and actually not even merely for the military prowess and success, but especially the inspirational aspect of rallying people and touching them, not just in the mind and in the heart.
Yes.
And a couple of modern examples, which I haven't spoken to. Ken Blanchard is someone who's given his life work to leadership dating back to the late 60s, still alive today. He's called the chief spiritual officer of his company, now called the Ken Blanchard Companies, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, and I'm certified in one of the best leadership workshops, in my view, in the world, that's studied at the postgraduate level, called Situational Leadership 2. So he's been a tremendous inspiration to me. And these are the people that really, and there's so many more. There's John Maxwell, Daniel Goleman in today's day and age, who's brought emotional intelligence to the forefront of leadership. And I'm an avid reader. Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan are regular aspects of my month-to-month journey and keeping up with what's happening in the industry and what's happening within the landscape of leadership. So those are a few names.
That's great. And those are all very impressive lists. I don't know if I'm redundant in this question, but what are the particular qualities that individuals that you both admire and are applicable? Sorry, let me rephrase that. What are the particular qualities these individuals have, which you find both admirable and applicable to today?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, John. I want to scream this one out. Number one is humility. It's the number one trait.
That's interesting.
And I'm so happy that a tremendous book for anybody who has even the slightest interest in leadership, it should be on your list, and it's called Good to Great.
Oh yes,
love
by
that
a
book.
professor named Jim Collins, a Stanford professor.
Yeah.
And whether you read the book itself or you listen to it on Audible, I did both. What's nice about the Audible version is that Jim is the actual author, the reader, and he provides quite a few additional anecdotes on the Audible version that are not in the book. But just so people know, anyone listening, that book was the result of a 5-year research project. We're not talking about a book where we interviewed 100 executives, and 5 years of researching all publicly traded companies in order to ascertain what makes a company great versus just good. And I'm so thrilled that humility in this 5 years of research was a recurring theme. I'm not giving too much away, but can you imagine how many companies they researched? And I think it sounds like, Alexander, you've read the book. John, you've probably...
I'm looking at it on my shelf right now. It's right over there.
There you go. Do you know how many were great? And this was over a 15-year period. We're not talking about 5 years or 10. 15 years, 11 companies.
Yeah.
Wow. 11 companies were great. And what they found in these 11 CEOs who didn't know each other, this wasn't a boys club or a big affluence club. These people had great humility. And so that's by far one of the greatest qualities that people who want long-term health and good for their organizations, for their employees, and the communities in which they do business, exercise great humility, not great ego.
Well, you know what's interesting, Gino, as you answered that question, it reminds me of the Pareto principle. 20%,
80-20. Yep.
80-20. So 20% do 80% of the work. And in essence, your response is the same. You're saying that 11 companies out of however many companies, maybe it's not exactly an 80-20 rule exactly, but you get a small number who do the great things, and the rest are also rans. And when we look at the stock market, for example, there's the S&P 500 has 500 companies, but it seems to be 10 companies that are leading the way in terms of market size. Why? Because they're doing something great that attracts more capital to them. So it bears in essence through all aspects of life. How have these individuals, Gino, impacted the way you serve your clients?
Tremendously and daily, John. These are, as I said to you, 25 years ago, it was a tough argument when an executive would say, Gino, instinctively, we think we believe this is good for us and for our leaders, but what's the data? And there wasn't a lot of reliable data to lean on to give them and show them the case studies. And so I'm pleased to say, of course, in our perhaps saturated world of analytics, that we at least have a great deal of really sound, solid data, such as Colin's work in Good to Great, to be able to bring case study and show the numbers behind why the investment makes sense. And so these people influence me daily. Ken Blanchard is still in business. It's an organization that I partner with regularly, reading articles from Bob Chapman and people in history, and bringing this to the conversation with these leaders. And as I think I heard you all acknowledge, these off the record conversations, that's where I've got to put my influencing hat on when a leader says, Gino, you make sense. It's a compelling case. It's likely the right thing to do, but we can't do it, right. And that's probably the most frustrating aspect, where off the record, someone will acknowledge that it's the right thing to do. And yet for one reason or another, and usually it's more than one, just not having the wherewithal to follow through and say, let's invest in our people, let's invest in our leaders ongoing, and we will all be better off in the long run.
I think that speaks to the leaders trying to satisfy multiple constituencies. They have their primary objectives, but they have these other constituencies that have a financial influence on them and or a constraint on them. And therefore, they can't really do what they really want to do. And it takes a special person just to stand back and say, I don't care what anyone has to say. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right. And this is how we're going to move forward. And then if it means that they have to take the fall, then they take the fall. But if they can stand through all the blowback, then they become an even greater, more inspiring, and more aspirational and more successful leader.
Yes. But very few have the ability to withstand the public backlash that comes from it, especially in today's day and age, where the public opinion is so loud and eminent everywhere. It's very challenging to stand there and take all of the abuse and the flack that comes from not following what the quote unquote majority, or the vocal minority, if you will, wants you to do.
It's always the vocal minority that are pushing.
Yes. Gino, I wanted to ask you a question going back to what we discussed earlier, which is different leadership styles. And I think now is probably a good time to insert this. So as you can imagine, there are many different types of leadership strategies. We've seen them in throughout history. We've seen ones that are people who are more taskmasters rather than collaborators. And to give a couple of examples, I know you're a Montreal Canadiens fan. So your buddy Scotty Bowman was the ultimate taskmaster, to the point where Steve Shutt actually, I believe, said one time that for 364 days a year, they hated him. And then on the 365th day, they got to win the Stanley Cup. And so they were willing to put up with him but he was far from the only one like that. In the business community, there was Steve Jobs, who was a true taskmaster. Lee Iacocca, who got a lot of praise from people as being a great leader, was again another big taskmaster, versus some people who are more collaborators. The most famous one I can think of in my mind would be Phil Jackson, coach of the Bulls in the 90s and then the Lakers in the 2000s, as well as somebody like Glenn Sather in the NHL. And so what I wanted to ask you is there one leadership style which you believe tends to be more successful on average? And has that changed over time?
There's two answers to that question, Alex, and the first one again is based on the incentive. If I have a goal, a business objective, a KPI, key performance indicator, a result that I must attain over a short period of time, then you've got quite a bit of arsenal in which you can look at and employ one. And to your point about the, quote unquote taskmaster or direct leadership style, authoritative, of course, that can garner results, but short term, not long term. The data shows overwhelmingly that you will, hence sometimes companies bring in someone to kind of turn a company around. They know they're only going to be there 12 to 24 months, if 24, because there'll be a mass exodus over and above other things. But you know what? So let's talk more about, the majority of companies, I will say, in order to, be an effective leader, i.e. get the best out of people. And when I say get the best out of people, it's not like squeezing a rag, to dry the water out. Getting the best of the people in which they themselves want to be the best they can be and are open to learning and new ideas and being coached. So leaders with that mindset need to have quite a bit in their toolkit. I often use the analogy of a carpenter. When the carpenters, whether it's at their truck, right, and before they go to the job, they're looking, okay, what am I doing today? What are all the tools I need to succeed? And what are some tools that I need to take just as contingencies in case things go wrong? And now, so you've got all the tools, but now you need to recognize where the opportunity is to use the right tool for the right reason at the right time to get the right result. And that's leadership. So I think you can hear in my answer, simple to talk about, but quite complex to be able to put into practice on a consistent basis. And that's what we do. We seek to provide those tools to say, Alex, you might meet someone who's very direct and is very analytical and is very introverted. And then a peer of theirs on the same work team is very extroverted and a risk taker and needs a lot of social interaction and needs a lot of detail. So how do you reconcile those two? And most leaders will articulate one communication to both of those people and expect the same result. And when they don't get the same result, they point the finger. So they'll say, what's wrong with you, Alex? And, this is a metaphor with a bit of a, humor that I sometimes do when I've got really good trust built up. Those types of circumstances, they'll say, well, Gino, what's wrong with this person? And, I'll say, after doing my due diligence, I think I know. Can I show you? And they'll say, sure. And I put a mirror up in front of them.
Nice.
And of course, I get the usual responses. What do you mean it's me? You're saying it's me? I say, yeah, it is you. Do you want to explore why it's you? It's not because you've got any malintent. It's just you're not looking at this in the manner in which setting that person up for success entails a different form of communication style, for example.
Right.
And so to answer your question, this is why the Ken Blanchard's program is one I espouse greatly, called situational leadership, because it empowers a leader to understand 4 different leadership styles that provide for all circumstances of all people and personalities. So we have situational leadership mixed with something called everything DISC, which is a personality and emotional intelligence model. And we blend them together to impart these knowledge and tactics and tools so that over time, leaders get better at recognizing that example I gave you and will stop and say, wait a sec, I better communicate this to Alexander this way, because I know he doesn't need the detail. But to John, I'm going to take an extra 4 or 5 minutes and I'm going to give him more detail because I know he appreciates that, both for the same reason to get the same result.
Yeah.
That's effective leadership.
How many times have you been punched in the face for sticking a mirror up in front of somebody?
Nobody yet, John, although I'm waiting for it.
I hope you have some self-defense moves.
Tuck that chin in, Gino. One quick follow-up question to that before I let you take it back over, Dad, to finish this section. But do you think, and I think I know the answer based on what you've already said, but do you think it's important to have different leadership strategies at different points in time for an organization? You know, whether an organization is at the growth stage versus the mature stage in their life cycle, or, you know, the startup phase. Like, do you believe that it is important or imperative to have different strategies and different styles at different points in time?
Yeah, as you allude, Alex, absolutely. Again, I stress it starts with philosophy. We've got different people with different backgrounds and different experiences, even different motivations, right? And so it in my view, foundationally, no, that's leadership, influencing people to bring out the best, to garner the best of their capabilities from their aptitude and their desire to do the good work that we're paying them to do, but not only do the good work, to feel fulfilled, you know, that ever elusive job satisfaction title. As I often say, what do you feel when you pull into the parking lot, or you pull up, or you walk up to your computer if it's at home? What do you feel about starting another day? Because that's the litmus test of that. So once you've got that common foundation of what leadership is, now, of course, you need to have a variety of strategies and tactics at your disposal in order to manifest those conditions. And, you know, the conditions are this: if I have a problem, or I'm stuck, or I'm worried about something, or I'm confused about something, how confident am I to come to you, my leader? That's the litmus test. And you see, that's where trust comes in, not intellect. It's got nothing to do with functional expertise. It's my confidence in being able to come to my leader because it's culturally acceptable to say, Alex, I have a problem, I need your help, and not have you perceive me as weak and as somebody not doing my job. Now, of course, I'm obviously not advocating that if Gino comes to Alex every day, consistently, often for the same things, at some point you may ask the question, maybe Gino doesn't have the competency to do the job.
Maybe Gino's a goldfish.
That's right. Maybe he's a goldfish. But yeah, so to answer your question, Alex, you've got to put in that tool belt a variety of tactics and tools so that we're employing the right leadership style, right, to the right person to get the right result. And that takes real practice.
Absolutely. Sorry, back to you, Dad.
Gino, you know, the passion in Gino's voice is in his responses is phenomenal. And I can't tell you how that appealing that is, because I personally am very passionate about what I do, and clearly Gino is passionate about what he does, and it resonates in his responses, and just he makes this interaction that we're having today just so much more exciting and appealing. And thank you, Gino, for bringing that to the table. Is there a difference in qualities required to lead in different industries? For example, are the skills required of a coach in sports different from those of a business executive?
Yeah, you know, that's almost a little bit of a loaded question, although I love the question. You know, speaking of Jack Welch, I go back to him. If you read his book, you know, one of the comments he made in his book, again, I'm paraphrasing, was, I wasn't the expert in any of the functional areas in which I had accountability for. That wasn't my job to be the expert. My job was to ensure that my executive team had all of the knowledge, skills, tools, and resources to do their jobs and to remove roadblocks and act as a sounding board. And that really resonates with me. And, you know, your point about sports, I often bring these analogies to my business because I actually believe that business can learn a lot from sports. Here we are in this analytics-driven world, right? Where I think I could certainly make an argument that we're oversaturated, with regards to that. But if we use them appropriately, and in the analogy of sports, they're coaches, aren't they? Whether it's a hockey team or a football team. And in truth, I'll take it right down to the collegiate level, certainly in the US, but even in Canada, that, coaches of female teams, of male teams. What's a coach? And there's alignment to leadership, because I think we mix up what we call coaching. Coaching is actually something you do once people possess competence,
Right.
Once they have the knowledge, right? So I go to school primarily to acquire knowledge, with the hope that once I graduate, even if I had a little bit of opportunity to gain maybe some practical experience, but all in all, I've acquired knowledge. And once I graduate, what's the expectation of what I'll do with that knowledge? Put it into practice, right?
Right.
But as I put it into practice, I'm going to need a sounding board. I'm going to need somebody to give me some feedback and inform me as to how my progress is, or when I'm struggling, how to overcome what those struggles are. So, teaching is imparting knowledge. Coaching is to refine and enable the application of that knowledge. And I find that, for example, to your point, John, that in sports, most of the coaches, we call them coaches. To me, they're managers. They're more managers. They're managing the day-to-day. They may provide some strategic aspects to the tactics of the day, of tonight's game, of next week's game. But coaching is literally sitting down with somebody or a group, right? Could be defensemen, forwards, in football, the defensive side, right? And reviewing performance and asking open questions and seeking to identify where we're really good. Let's keep doing it, reinforce the behavior. And where we're really not, let's talk about this together. Why is it that professional athletes get feedback every day? And most of it, by the way, is positive, right? Is it just to feed their egos? And how often in business do we give people regular feedback, especially positive? Because, of course, when someone does something wrong, we're pretty quick to act, aren't we?
Sure.
We've got to redirect and we've got to correct that. But when people do good work, how often do we give them positive feedback so that we can build their confidence and reinforce the good behaviors?
Right. That's bang on. Absolutely bang on. What would you say are the most critical foundational knowledge and skills in order to build the basis for a highly effective, consistent, successful leadership?
Well, John, when I think about that question, knowledge and skills, I'll park the skills for a moment. And I do believe, and I've come to see and learn and listen to leaders who have had great success. I'm proud to still be working with many of those that I call my clients, my partners to this day. So I actually start with, non-skills, things such as humility, self-awareness. There's a big one. Your ability to be introspective and look at yourself through a clear lens. In Collins' book, Good to Great, there's a chapter called The Mirror and the Window. And phenomenal that these great companies, every time they succeeded, the CEOs gave the credit to the employees and all their staff. And when they failed, they looked in the mirror. They didn't look through the window, and they stood up in front of everybody and said, it's my responsibility. We had a bad quarter. We didn't give our people what they required in order to set them up for success. Hence the humility and the self-awareness. Self-awareness is correlated in this big topic in which we often provide many of our leaders, emotional intelligence. And then on the skill side, I think the two premium skills along with strategic planning, having a strategy and a vision, is communication, listening, and influencing. you think about those skills. If you're an executive, who would ask you, are you a good communicator? How many executives do you know that might say, I think I'm decently effective, but I think I could be better? Do you know any executives that would say that?
Well, I would hope most would say that.
Well, me too. And, if I had $1 for every employee of these executives, whether it's a VP or a director or a middle manager that says, Gino, my leader is tremendously smart, they almost always say that. But as far as listening goes, for example, not a very good listener. Why is that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the skills and the attributes that I think lend themselves to a person becoming a great influencer. And, John and Alex, sometimes people say, Gino, what's the most important thing that a leader has to have? And the good news about this answer is it's just one word: followers. That's what a leader leads. If you don't have followers, then you can't lead, because who are you influencing? Right. But when people freely choose to say, I want to follow Alex, I like the way he operates, I like the way he conducts himself. By the way, way down on the list, believe it or not, is, and I admire how smart he is. Although people do, they most certainly do, it's not in the top 3 as to why I love following this person as my leader.
Right.
That makes
a ton of sense.
All right. Well, I know we're running short on time here, Gino, so I'm going to move us to the last section here, which is technology and the evolving landscape of leadership. And so one of the things that I know you wanted to discuss, and we wanted to discuss with you, is how has technology impacted the state of leadership, and by extension, the leaders themselves? Has it been a positive development, or has it negatively impacted the way that individuals lead?
Yeah, so, I'm going to answer that in all likelihood, probably for at least some, if not many, listening to this unpopularly and saying it's worse. Yeah. It's worse. Because, and here's why. Here's my rationale, both experienced and in the data that's coming in. And, I only use COVID as a marker in history because, of course, it turned our world upside down, at least for a period of time. Although that's not the primary influence of how I'm answering. Leadership is a human endeavor. If you remove human beings from the equation, then it would be very easy to say technology has been very good. And by the way, there has been and are positive aspects of how technology can augment our ability to effectively lead. But overall, I would say negatively, because with many more people working remotely from home, we're extracting the human interaction. As wonderful as it is to see you all on screen, and it is, I call it a really good second place, but in my view, it's a long way off first place, which is in person. And, interestingly, almost without exception, my clients, as we went through late 2020 and early 21, when I was doing almost all my work online, once I got back face-to-face live with my organization, to the person, they said, Gino, the online was good. I mean, solid. We know you, but it's nothing like it is when you're here in person with us. And I think that speaks to your question. So listen, technology can help. We give means for people to be able to learn things on the go, self-paced learning. It's good. But in terms of truly being an effective influencer and building trust with people and getting them to freely want to follow, you need human interaction. So to that end, I think we've gone too far, and I'm hoping we're recalibrating back to a more central place.
I send a few hallelujahs to that response, because I can't tell you how frustrated I am in today's world with the lack of human interaction. And, it is extraordinarily frustrating. Everything is an email, or you're speaking with a chat bot that is trained to try and respond to you. And it just doesn't get done unless you're speaking to another human being. I called an insurance company yesterday, and And the first 10 minutes were an exercise in frustration as I had to interact with a chatbot until I finally got a hold of a human being and then had the issue resolved. So thank you. That's very insightful.
Yes, I'm laughing because I heard that interaction yesterday and screaming at a computer that only hears the first response that he says and it means nothing. So he's getting himself all worked up for not a whole lot.
I yell at my car computer as well.
Anyway, I'll ask you one more question, Gino, and then we'll get to wrapping things up.
Sure.
And that was, do you find there has been a change in the degree and quality of skills development offered internally by different organizations? For context, you mentioned that early in your career, Bell offered a variety of skills training opportunities within the company. And in my experience, I actually found that the company I used to work for, CI Investments, used to offer that as well. And I wanted to ask you, are these opportunities still offered today? And if not, why do you think that is?
It's better. I say it's better. It's better than it was 20 years ago. 10 years ago, moderately better. So on scale, I believe that organizations are at least attempting to provide opportunities for their people. Now, listen, opportunities is a broad term. What kinds of opportunities are they in face-to-face form? Are they all online? But right. Just from a simplistic opportunity perspective, it's gotten better, no doubt. When I speak to even people who aren't clients, do you have opportunity if you want to develop in one area or another? And usually the answer is yes to some degree. I think the question is more around the quality of those opportunities to develop and, and our ability to actually measure what their impact has been. And, that I'll say, Alex, it's kind of a carry over to your question. But, when one of the things that Good to Great validated, by the way, I love that book, but the truth is, and I say this with all humility, it honestly simply validated what I've experienced in 25 years in this industry and what I believe as a human being. We're human. We're social creatures. That's just an unequivocal fact. And so here's what happens when leaders are equipped with the right knowledge, skills, tools, and resources and ongoing support to create the conditions in which people freely want to be their best. Ken Blanchard calls it giving discretionary effort. Gino, why did you come in early and why are you staying late? Well, not because my leader told me, because I want to. I want to get a little extra work done. I want to do a little bit more. It's called, and why? And, I ought to say this. I know we're short on time, but I really ought to say this fast. A very, very interesting piece of data that's come out in the last few years, which doesn't surprise me, but it is what it is. Our parents, and Alexander, you're on here with your father, and certainly my grandparents, John, yours, the word loyalty was a very important word, not just in families and in society, but in business. Loyalty to company. And over the last 25 years, loyalty to company has been regularly and consistently dropping. No longer the same loyalty to company. And I won't go into all the rationale why, although I'll say predominantly it started in the 80s when, for the first time ever, layoffs happened. And so as time went on, people started to learn, so if we're not hitting the number, you can be laid off even if you're doing good work. Yes, that's the reality. So it stands to reason, even at that level, if not for many more reasons, that loyalty to companies have gone down. But here's what's interesting and equally sensible. In the last 20 years, loyalty to exceptional leaders has gone up. And so here's how it translates in this modern, technologically driven world. If I work for Alexander, who I love working for because he's an exceptional leader who values me as a human being and seeks to set me up for success, albeit at times challenges me, but helps me grow, leaves the company and goes to another company. And then 6 weeks later picks up the phone and says, hey, Gino, I have this great opportunity at my new company. What are the odds that Gino's going to follow Alex?
I would say high.
Very high. And companies have started to learn that. And so the influence of great leaders is, but Gino, do you not like the company? No, I like the company and I like the job. But you know what? I work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and life's too short to work for any leader except one who truly values me as a person and doesn't merely see me as a means to their end.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going.
Yeah,
I'm going to lead.
You're working
And
for the
so
people, not the logo.
and so there's a high cost to that, to the company, right? Because I'm sure I don't have to remind you the cost of replacing another employee, both hard and soft costs that we lose. So that is an inverted, right, axis of loyalty to companies down, loyalties to exceptional leaders up. And in a day and age where we can now, we're always, search companies, search firms, and Indeed and all the platforms, it's very easy for someone to leave a company and seek an environment that's more conducive to what their goals are. So leadership plays a big part in all these things, as I think you can ascertain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that Gino. And we've really appreciated this subject. It's been a fascinating discussion, and it's been a true pleasure getting to speak with you today. Where can people learn more about Ferrin Leadership Development and get in contact with you?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And I've enjoyed it myself. Thank you very much. And I think you two both know we've merely scratched the surface as long as our talk has gone today. But who knows? Maybe I'll come back again if you'll have me. But listen, folks can go to my website, FerrinLeadershipDevelopment.com. We're actually in the process now of updating and adding some new exciting tools that I'm very excited about to further help leaders. They can email me at Gino Ferrin at Ferrin Leadership Development. They can find me on LinkedIn. So any of those, there's a free consultation in it. If any leader or organization wants to talk to me a little bit about potential development for their leaders, we set up a free 30-minute consultation, and we'll have a good conversation and see if we can help each other out.
Excellent. Thank you,
I
Gino.
just wanted to step in here and just give my last 2 cents on this. Gino, it's been an absolute inspirational afternoon being here with you and listening to you respond to our questions. If I were to draw an analogy to sports, I would say today you were Babe Ruth at the plate and you hit every pitch out of the ballpark. Wow, what a performance. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you this afternoon.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Alexander. Bill, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Gino.
It's been a pleasure listening to this. I got to tell you, it's great. Alex, I didn't mean to step on you.
Oh, no, it's okay, Bill. I just wanted to say thank you to Gino, and I just wanted to give a quick shout out before we throw it back over to you. My dad and I were at the Argos game this past weekend. Unfortunately, it didn't go very well, but one of our friends who sits in our section, my dad's a season ticket holder and has been for 20 odd years now, almost 30 years. And so Tristan has been a loyal listener of the podcast from day one. And we just wanted to thank him for listening and giving us his feedback. And he's told us how much he's enjoyed the podcast so far and how helpful he finds it. And so having people like Gino on here is a tremendously insightful learning opportunity for a lot of people. And so Tristan, keep listening, and we hope to keep bringing you good content in the future. And I'll turn it back over to you, Bill.
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. And I'm going to exercise a little bit of what was mentioned early on in this podcast, which is some discipline, because I could ask Gino a lot of different questions. It was a great conversation. I echo John's sentiments as well, Gino. Thank you very, very much. Before we go, guys, John, Alex, we know how to get a hold of Gino. How do we get a hold of you guys if we want to have a further conversation?
Yep, absolutely. Everybody can go to our website, which is medwealth.ca. That's med-wealth.ca. And they can find all of our contact info on there, including our phone number. Email address is info@medwealth.ca. And we're also on LinkedIn and Twitter, or X, I should say. I always get that mixed up. Everything is on our website, though, so you can head on over to medwealth.ca and get whatever you need to get in contact with us.
And the old-fashioned human way is 905-568-2000, 1-888-568-1170.
Just one question, John. Do I get a chat bot if I call that number?
Absolutely not. This is the last organization that still values human beings, with the exception of Gino's, who also is not employing chatbots. So for those NVIDIA stock shareholders, be careful. There's a comeback in human interaction.
Right. You'll get an earful, not a chatbot.
Oh, gosh. I yell at them too, John. Don't worry. I yell at them all the time. Listeners, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this conversation. I'm sure you found it as useful and as interesting as we did. And it begs the question, if you're not a subscriber, why aren't you? It's easy. The subscribe button is right there. Just hit subscribe. That way you don't have to think about, where did I hear this podcast, or when does a new one come out? It will be delivered to you automatically. That's the good part of technology. On behalf of John and Alex and everybody at MedWealth Financial, I want to thank you. I'm Bill Tucker, urging and reminding you, don't wait. Live your best life today. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Prescribing Prosperity. Visit our website at med-wealth.ca. That's med-wealth.ca for more information, or to connect with us for a consultation. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and their guests, and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of IPC Securities Corporation. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investment advice. Always seek the advice of a qualified and licensed financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment or retirement planning. MedWealth Financial Services can provide a private consultation to help you determine the suitability of any guidance discussed on the show.